Which drug is most frightening? I'm just an internet mum, but I have a story to share that still breaks my heart. My son was addicted to heroin and fentanyl. He was so sure he had it under control that he was a professional junkie who would never overdose. But he was wrong. My beautiful boy, with his poetic soul and hippie spirit, died from fentanyl poisoning 4 years ago. So many people loved him. After he passed, his doctor called to tell me he had just started a program to get clean, only 3 days before the overdose. The coroner said it was just a tiny amount, 3 grains of salt, that pushed his usual dose into deadly territory. He couldn't have known it would be too much this time. I miss him so much it hurts. If you're struggling too, please know there are options and people who want to help. Reach out to someone who loves you, let them support you. Sending a huge hug from Lincoln's mum. Story 2. My brother is lost to meth addiction somewhere on the streets of Denver. We've tried everything to help him. Rehab, jail, psychiatry. We spent so much money trying to save him. But he refuses it all, unless it's a hotel room he can use to cook meth. The last time I saw him was in April 2019. He flicked a cigarette butt in our garage and burned our house down. Then he ran, leaving the state that very night. We haven't spoken since. Every day I brace myself for the call I know is coming. The only time I feel a small sense of peace is when he's locked up, because at least then I know he has food and shelter and he's off the drugs. It shatters me to imagine what it will do to our parents. I've been steeling myself to be their rock when the news comes. In my mind, I've already mourned his death years ago. Today is his 34th birthday, and I don't know if he'll see 35. Before delving into the next regrettable recap, please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like us to create more of this content. Thank you. Story 3. I've seen a lot in my years as an ER and ICU doctor, but nothing quite like the devastation left in the wake of Angel's Trumpet. It's a pretty name for an ugly drug, one that'll drag you kicking and screaming into a waking nightmare. Just ask my brother. He tried it twice, and it rewired him. Permanently. He came back from those trips a different person, like the drug had reached in and scrambled the very essence of who he was. And he's one of the lucky ones. He survived. You see, Angel's Trumpet, Datura, Nightshade, they don't just get you high. They attack the very system that keeps you alive. The acetylcholine network, the puppet master pulling the strings of your heart, your lungs, your fear response. These drugs cut those strings and leave you in freefall. I've fought to keep people breathing when Datura had its claws in them. I've seen the damage it can do, and let me tell you, it's not pretty. But the real kicker? Despite the bleeding trees, the glass spiders crawling out of eye sockets, the shadow creatures lurking in every corner, it's addictive. Something about this hell in plant form sinks its hooks in deep and doesn't let go. Even the most hardened drug users give it a wide berth. And I get it. I live with a broken nervous system, betrayed by my own body. The same system Angel's Trumpet toys with, like a cat with a mouse. Every day is a struggle, a battle against my own wiring. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. But some people chase the nightmare anyway. They step willingly into the mouth of madness, risking their sanity, their lives, for a high that brings no euphoria, only terror. Brain damage, heart failure, a one-way ticket to the morgue. Those are the souvenirs you bring back from a dance with Datura. It's Russian roulette with a flower, and the house always wins. So take it from someone who's seen the aftermath, who's held together the broken pieces left behind. Angel's Trumpet isn't worth it. Not for a thrill, not for a dare, not for anything. Because once you go down that rabbit hole, you might never find your way back out. And that's a trip you don't want to take, trust me. Stick to safer vices, the ones that don't unmake you from the inside out. Life's too short to gamble with the devil in the garden. Just ask my brother. If you can reach him, that is, in the shattered remains of the mind Datura left him with. He'll tell you the same thing. Angels belong in heaven, not in your bloodstream. Remember that, and steer clear of the trumpet's call. Some songs aren't meant to be heard. And this one? It's a requiem, and you don't want to be the guest of honour at your own funeral. Not like this, never like this. Story 4. I was doing so well, sober for 3.5 whole years. But then I relapsed, and it all went downhill fast. I had this tiny little tattoo on my hand, just a small dot that looked like a freckle. But when I tried to join the military, they wouldn't let me in because of it. I guess the rules had changed just a year or two before, and now certain tattoos were okay. But mine was still too much for them. That rejection really got me down. I started taking Unisum to help me sleep, because I was just so sad and didn't want to think anymore. But those Unisum pills quickly turned into an addiction. I'd go to Walmart and steal bottles of the generic sleep aids, then eat handfuls of them a few times a day. I'd chug Monster energy drinks too, just to try and stay awake through the haze. I was going through hundreds of those pills every single week. It was the most addictive thing I'd ever taken. I don't remember much from that 6 to 9 month period, just being in a constant state of delirium, not fully hallucinating spiders or anything, but completely numb to any emotions. After a few weeks, the really scary part stopped, but I was still just a walking zombie, my brain all messed up. I'd have conversations with people who weren't even there. I even tried to kill myself at one point, taking who knows how much of that dangerous stuff. I flat out died for a bit, but thankfully, they were able to bring me back. When they finally got me to the psych ward, I was still trapped in this delirium, slipping in and out of reality. I'd be lucid for a moment, then plunge right back into this hellish hallucinatory nightmare. I watched myself do all these crazy, violent things but couldn't stop it. I even ripped IVs out of my own arm. They said it would take a year for my brain to heal, but it was more like 2 years, and I don't think I'm ever going to be 100% normal again. I still wake up sometimes and see spiders crawling around. It's been a decade, and I've done so much therapy, but that DPH addiction has left its mark. I'm just glad my kids' allergies are under control now, so I don't have to keep that stuff in the house. I don't know what I'd do if I had easy access to it again. That stuff should be illegal. It's way too dangerous. Story 5. As an ER doctor, I've seen some truly horrific things. The terrible effects of hardcore drugs like crocodile and meth. Those are the stuff of nightmares for sure, but the reality is, the average person is much more likely to find their personal demon lurking in the medicine aisle of the local supermarket. And the scariest of all those over-the-counter drugs, acetaminophen, also known as paracetamol. It doesn't have the wild, dangerous reputation of the party drugs, and that's exactly what makes it so shockingly hazardous. People think it's completely harmless, so they just pop those pills like candy, taking them for every little ache and pain. They have no idea how easy it is to accidentally overdose on this stuff. I'll never forget one of the sickest patients I've ever treated. A young woman who came into the ER. Her skin a sickly yellow colour, barely even coherent. She'd just taken a few too many paracetamol over a couple of days for a minor neck injury from a minor car accident, but the damage was catastrophic. Her blood had turned into more clot than plasma, clogging up every single IV we tried to put in. We fought so hard to keep her alive, but the paracetamol had already done its dirty work. She lost fingers on one hand, the tissue starved of blood, all because of this safe drug. There is an antidote, but it's a desperate race against the clock. Miss that window, and you're looking at total liver failure, kidney shutdown, brain damage, even death. These days, paracetamol is the only pain medication I can take, due to a medication interaction. And every single time I swallow that little white pill, I feel the fear rising in my throat. I've seen firsthand what this stuff can do, how quickly it can turn on you. So I measure my doses like a miser counting coins, only taking it when the pain is truly unbearable. Because I know the stories, I've seen the aftermath, and I sure don't want to become another cautionary tale. Paracetamol is the wolf in sheep's clothing, the monster hiding in plain sight. It terrifies me more than any back-alley street drug ever could, because it's right there, in every single home, in every purse, just waiting for that one moment of carelessness, that one tiny mistake. So the next time you reach for that bottle, remember my words. Remember the yellow skin, the clotted veins, the lost fingers, and please think twice before you swallow, because sometimes the most dangerous drugs are the ones we trust the most, and paracetamol? It's the snake in the grass, the devil we know, and it's always hungry for more. Story 6. There's a drug out there that's been nicknamed the devil's breath. And when you hear about what it can do, you'll understand why. It's a mind-altering substance found in South America, and many consider it to be the scariest drug in the world. Then there's crocodile, which is basically a homemade semi-synthetic version of morphine. The really frightening thing about crocodile is that it causes this horrific necrosis, or tissue death, at the injection site. I do not at all recommend looking up images of what that looks like. It's absolutely nightmare-inducing. But even though those drugs sound terrifying, the one that really hit close to home for me was scopolamine. My ENT doctor prescribed it to me after I developed this awful, unrelenting vertigo that just wouldn't go away for 2 whole weeks. Now, I'm not a recreational drug user at all, so reading about all the potential side effects of scopolamine really freaked me out. Hallucinations, confusion, memory loss, the list goes on. I was so worried I was going to have some kind of terrible reaction. Luckily, I didn't experience any of those scary side effects. But the medication didn't really help with the vertigo either, so my doctor told me to stop taking it after about a week. The whole thing just felt so weird to me. I mean, this scopolamine stuff is used so often in hospitals, even in palliative care to help reduce oral secretions. It's considered a staple medical treatment. But then you read about how it can basically turn you into a zombie, a mindless drone under someone else's control, the devil's breath, and all that. Story 7. For me, the scariest drug out there has got to be meth. My own dad was a meth addict, and watching him go through all of that was absolute hell. Growing up, all I ever wanted was his love and attention, but all I got was abandonment issues and constant self-doubt. I would blame myself, let him blame me too. He'd punch holes in the doors and walls whenever I begged him to just spend some time with me, watch a movie, go for a drive, draw together, and then he'd call me an ungrateful brat through his tears and rage. The worst part was the gaslighting. He'd make me question everything, make me feel like I had no self-worth at all. One minute he'd be manic, totally infatuated with himself, and the next he'd be downright abusive and suicidal. Then he'd be back to his old self again. And for a second I'd see a spark of the dad I remembered from when I was little. But now I know, looking back, that it was the meth the whole time. I never really knew my real dad. All I knew was the addict. As an adult trying to heal, I had to accept that it was never really my fault that our relationship fell apart. But he would still try to make me feel guilty, saying it was because I chose myself over him. If he ever overdosed, he'd say it was my fault for cutting him out. And if he died, I'd have to live with that guilt forever. He even went so far as to disown me, then turn around and say he never said that I just never wanted to be his daughter. Meth stole my whole childhood, and I've never even touched the stuff. It's killed my father in every way that matters, even though he's still walking around, still breathing. I've got a more than healthy fear of most drugs out there, but meth is by far the scariest to me. It's the only one that can destroy you completely, yet still leave your heart beating. That's the stuff of nightmares. Story 8. If you really want to know about the scariest drug out there, it's got to be alpha PVP, or what they call flacker here in the States. It's basically meth, but with 10 times the addictive potential and 20 times the rush of stimulation. I've seen people turn into total monsters in less than a month of using this stuff. Experiencing it firsthand was the only time I've ever even contemplated suicide, just from the come down. It's that bad. And when you factor in that it only costs around 50 cents per 100 grams to produce in the right kind of lab, it becomes this horrifying epidemic, especially over here in Russia. It's not just about the insane addiction either. This drug can make people unbelievably violent. Fentanyl and methadone might kill you, but flacker will eventually kill you too. And a lot of innocent people will suffer before you get there. I'm an ICU nurse, and I used to work in South Florida a few years ago, when flacker was really starting to take off. Those patients would come in with insanely high fevers, completely out of control and agitated. We'd have to sedate them, intubate them, and restrain them for at least a full day before we could even try to wean them off the sedation. And let me tell you, those patients were freakishly strong. It would take 4 of us just to hold them down and keep them from hurting themselves. Now that I work on the West Coast, nobody's ever even heard of flacker. But I'll never forget those patients, or the pure terror of dealing with that drug. Flacker is all over the place here in South Africa too, no doubt contributing to our already sky-high rates of violent crime. People really do transform into complete demons on this stuff. It's the stuff of nightmares, I'm telling you. If you value your life and the lives of those around you, you'll stay far, far away from alpha PvP. That's a drug you do not want to mess with. Story 9. Nothing compares to xylazine, or what they call trank dope around here. This stuff is just plain evil. I can't even fathom how it ever got put into circulation in the first place. I know a small group of people who were unknowingly getting this stuff in New Orleans for the past 5-6 years now. It's only really been in the news for about a year. And the damage it's done to their bodies is just heartbreaking. This xylazine, it's a horse tranquilizer. It doesn't even contain any actual opiates at all. But it just eats away at your skin, causing these horrible abscesses. It literally destroys your skin from the inside out, and it just knocks you out, leaving you in this super groggy, messed up state. The worst part is, we have no idea how to properly detox people from this stuff. It's so cheap and easy for dealers to get their hands on, so it's just going to keep spreading. And on top of that, it doesn't respond to naloxone or any of the typical medication-assisted treatments for opioid addiction. If there was ever a time when we needed to be going full throttle on harm reduction for opioid users, it's right now. Because this xylazine stuff is just devastating. Heroin is basically extinct around here. It's all fentanyl and this trank dope now. And the combination of the two is just deadly. The addiction goes beyond just the drugs themselves too. There's this whole ritual, this process that your brain gets hooked on, firing off all those feel-good chemicals. Even if you're not using real opioids, your brain can still cause those intense withdrawal symptoms. It's like a psychosomatic thing, where your body thinks it's dependent, even if the receptors aren't being filled. And I think a lot of users just keep hoping, maybe this time it will be better. The transition from pure heroin to all these crazy adulterants happens so slowly, that by the time people realise how bad it is, they're just stuck in this endless loop. It's heartbreaking to witness. Story 10. The drug that really terrifies me the most is crystal meth. I've seen it absolutely destroy my own brother's life. And it's been this long, heartbreaking downward spiral that I wouldn't wish on anyone. He started using it in his early 20s, and the truth is, he was ruined from the very first time he tried it. It's like he had some kind of genetic affinity for that stuff, and it just took over his whole being. For a while, when he finally managed to get off the meth in his 40s, he was pretty much brain damaged. He could barely function properly anymore, and now he's just one of those zombie-like figures you see wandering the streets, a shell of the person he used to be. It's been absolutely devastating to watch. I love my brother so much, and it kills me to see what crystal meth has done to him. He had his whole life ahead of him, so much potential, but that drug, it just consumed him entirely. I really can't stress this enough. If you're a young person out there, just please don't ever touch crystal meth. I've seen firsthand how it can destroy someone, how it can rob them of their humanity. It's not worth the risk, not even a little bit. The scariest drug I've ever heard about has got to be datura. I remember my friend deciding to try it for his 30th birthday at a big backyard BBQ, and let me tell you, it was absolute mayhem. At first, he just seemed a little off, but then halfway through the party, he started completely losing it. He was convinced he was in this whole other dimension, and that the neighbours' kids had been sent there to try and destroy him. So he started trying to get away, thinking everyone was out to get him. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. He thought he was swimming in the grass, trying to dive down to avoid the trees around him. And then he'd just curl up in a ball, trying to hold his organs in because he thought they were falling out, and he needed to push his brain back inside and plug his ears with the grass. This went on for days. He was never the same after that. Even 10 years later, he still has trouble remembering things and keeps asking if what he's experiencing is even real. The PTSD from that datura trip just scarred him for life. With other drugs, at least you kind of know that the hallucinations aren't real, even if they feel super intense. But with datura, your brain and your body just completely believe everything you're seeing and feeling. It's not just trippy visuals. It's this full-blown delusion where you genuinely think your ears are going to fall off if you don't stuff them with grass to stop your brain from spilling out. I've tried other stuff before, but nothing compares to the sheer terror and madness of datura. It's on a whole other level of hallucinogenic. Anyone who even thinks about messing with that drug is just asking for a lifetime of trauma and torment. It's not worth the risk, not even a little bit. Story 11. I've seen my fair share of drug-related horrors working in the ER, meth, heroin, you name it, but nothing quite compares to the sheer terror and devastation of crocodile, also known as desamorphine. This homemade drug, popular in parts of Eastern Europe, is essentially a cheaper, more dangerous alternative to heroin. The manufacturing process leaves it contaminated with all sorts of toxic impurities, and the effects on the human body are absolutely horrifying. Users can experience severe, irreversible damage to their tissues and organs. The drug eats away at the skin and flesh, causing open, infected sores. In some cases, it leads to the complete deterioration of limbs, requiring amputation. What makes crocodiles so terrifying is that even as users' bodies are falling apart, the drug seems to keep them going, trapping them in this living nightmare of decay and deterioration. It's almost as if it prevents them from succumbing to their injuries, leaving them in this zombie-like state. The stories and images associated with crocodile are truly the stuff of nightmares. Compared to more well-known drugs, it's on a whole other level of toxicity and destruction. It utterly consumes and devours its users, both physically and mentally. I'll never forget seeing the sheer scale of the damage it can cause, the severe tissue necrosis, the bones protruding from rotting flesh. It's beyond comprehension, a testament to how dangerous these home-made, improperly synthesized drugs can be. Story 12. I'll never forget the first time I learned about devil's breath, also known as scopolamine. It sent chills down my spine and left me feeling profoundly unsettled. From what I understand, this drug has the power to turn a person into a quasi-zombie, robbing them of their free will and making them highly susceptible to the suggestions of others. Imagine this. A stranger could simply blow this substance in your face as you pass by, and suddenly you're not yourself anymore. Your actions are no longer your own, and you won't even remember what happened. It's like you've been turned into a puppet, with someone else pulling the strings. I heard about a Criminal Minds episode that explored this terrifying concept, where someone used scopolamine to make people commit unspeakable acts. At first, I thought it must be some sort of fictional horror story, but then I looked into it further and realised it's a real drug, one that's even used for medical purposes in certain cases. Apparently, scopolamine is sometimes prescribed in patch form to help with nausea, particularly for people going on cruises. It's also used in end-of-life care, but the dosage and delivery method are completely different from what happens when it's used for more sinister purposes. Thanks for listening to these regrettable recaps. Please like and subscribe if you'd like more of this content in the future. And watch the video that's on your screen now for more regrettable recaps.